Today we're going to talk about teaching ethical responsibility in a digital world. And my main theme is not only is it important to integrate technology within the curriculum, it's necessary to encourage students to take leadership as we negotiate over how new technologies are used, designed, and understood. We're living in a changing world. So I wanted to start off today with a little video from one of my former students, a 15-year-old Korean girl, Annie Han, from my Computers, Ethics, Society, and Design course.
Lori Drew said nothing as she walked up the steps of the Los Angeles federal courthouse as jury selection began in her case. She faces 4 computer crimes charges for violating the terms of service on the social networking site MySpace.com. The 49-year-old gained national attention after being portrayed as a vindictive mom whose online actions allegedly led to a 13-year-old girl's suicide. She's accused of helping create a false online identity on MySpace, a teenage boy who befriended Megan Meyer online. Meyer had...
Jesse's mother, Cynthia, last May. Jesse agreed to do a story with us about kids using their cell phones to take nude pictures of themselves. Jesse did it, thinking only her boyfriend would see it. But in the world of technology and kids being cruel, Jesse's private picture was sent to hundreds of cell phones to schools all over the city for everyone to see. We protected her identity, but she was clearly humiliated.
I still get harassed and stuff, and I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that no one else will ever have to go through this again.
But at home, at school, with her friends, the teasing and taunting continued long after our interview. Cynthia calls it torture.
She was called filthy names. Things were thrown at her.
It was so bad, Jessie started skipping school.
I took her car away, and when I dropped her off, somebody would take her out, or she would hide all day in school.
Even though her grades plummeted, Jessie silenced the laughter and graduated with her class at Sycamore High School. Cynthia thought finally that one silly picture was behind them.
Every single place she went, they knew about that picture. They saw the picture. They knew about the picture.
So the teasing continued.
It's abuse. She was abused.
2 months after our interview, Jessie went to a funeral of a teenager who committed suicide. She came home and did the same thing.
So the stories of Jessie Logan and Megan Meyer, I think, really emphasize the need to teach ethics and responsibility within the classroom environment. And how do we do that? I would argue, at least in part, by presenting materials such as this. I disagree with some of the experts who would say that we shouldn't show material like this because we don't want to, you can't really frighten kids into doing the right thing. But my goal here isn't to frighten kids, it's to have them empathize and think twice before they go ahead and participate in these type of activities. But what I want to do today is take a step further back. I'm going to argue that it's about more than simply teaching human-heartedness and empathy. If we take a step back and look at it from the broader historical perspective, that's what I want to do today. So how do we view issues like online bullying from a greater historical perspective? And secondly, we may ask in this process, what is the goal of education? And finally, how do we prepare students for the future? With the introduction of any new communications technology, we see an initial period of confusion as we negotiate how a new technology is designed, used, and understood. So, there we go. And if we look back in the historical record, we see this is a phenomenon that's been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. In 1905, the electrical journal Telephony reflects the invention of new machinery, devices, and processes is continually bringing up new questions of law, puzzling judges, lawyers, and laymen alike. I have a couple fun stories here, stories of romance, misadventure, and misunderstanding from the historical record that I think are a lot of fun. During the summer of 1886, a nice young man from the city met one of the rustic beauties of the place and fell in love. They corresponded, and she invited him to visit. One day, a telegram appeared with news of his impending arrival. Somehow, nobody will ever know just how, 15 minutes after the message clicked into the office, every person in the town knew that young Blake was coming to see Miss Trevette. Every young lady of the town made up her mind to catch a glimpse of this rash young man who sent telegrams, and every man determined to be there to see that everything went smoothly. When young Blake alighted from his carriage, full of foreboding that marked him as a proper suitor, an audience of 499 villagers had gathered to watch, and followed him to the young lady's house. Panicked by the approaching procession, Miss Trevette sent word of her absence, halting the romance at a blow. So that's from 1886 in one of the popular journals of the time. Another story. A millionaire speculator at the Chicago Board of Trade had a phone line installed between his office and his home, one of the first such lines in the city. One day he answered a call from a man who claimed that he had bound and gagged the man's wife and servants and set oily rags around the house. The businessman was instructed to give $20,000 from an office safe to a Confederate waiting at that moment outside his office, or else. The ransom delivered, he rushed home to discover his wife serene and tranquil, the family hearth undisturbed. His gracious helpmeet had invited into the house a well-dressed gentleman who asked to make a private business call to her husband. A third story. A clerk at Ebit House, a leading society hotel in Washington, D.C., was deceived. The clerk received a call from someone who claimed to be Major Peabody, a well-known permanent guest of the house, who instructed the clerk to pay charges of $54.50 on a suit of clothes. The fraud was discovered when the real Major Peabody arrived for dinner. And one last story. I'm not sure if you guys remember having telephone operators. I think half of you guys probably remember having the phone operator. So when the telephone operator came in, this was kind of a new social role that people weren't that comfortable with. And the predictable problems arose. Jones, a Boston businessman, had solicited the services of the sweet-voiced operator while his wife was on summer vacation. Miss Jones returned suddenly and had a surprise waiting. The next morning, the telephone rings. Horrified, hubby sits up in bed, in dazed surprise, while Mrs. Jones goes to the phone. "Hello," says Mrs. Jones. "Hello, pet," comes back a woman's voice. "Hurry up and get up. I've been ringing you long enough." And even if you go back, and I talked to my grandmother, I read this in the literature, but I didn't actually believe it was true. But when you get out of a bath, Or you're sitting in the bathroom and the phone rings. Is it okay? Is it acceptable to answer the telephone? My grandmother, back in, I guess, 1935, it was an open question because you weren't yet dressed to go out in public. But we learn to adapt to new technologies, and there's this initial period in which we decide how technology is used, designed, and understood. So that's part of that process. We learn it's not really okay to call during dinner, although I'm not sure that's the case anymore. That may have shifted, but I remember as a child, you didn't really call between 7 and 8 because that's when people ate, and that was not socially appropriate. So, as my old philosophy professor used to say, there's nothing new under the sun. With the introduction of any new communication technologies, we see this period of negotiation and adaptation as technologies lead to important changes in almost every domain of human activity. And we see that today. We see utopian rhetoric. We see concerns over privacy, identity theft, concerns over the rapid spread of information, file sharing boundaries, and stupefaction of our children. This last one I think is kind of fun, because if we look back in the record, people have been saying this forever. I mean, certainly long before the invention of the TV. If you go back and look at the invention of books, in societies, in non-literate societies, it's amazing. Their memory capacity is amazing. You can't write anything down, so you have to remember it. But as soon as you add books to the equation, suddenly nobody can remember much of anything. So anyway, this has been a long, I think for several thousand years, parents have been saying, you got to get rid of this new technology. So I think that's just kind of interesting. And I just put a couple of fun things up here of some of the new issues and confusion and stories that we see.
Camera is the strongest weapon in our lives today.
Someone out there hates you.
Okay, that poor guy who did that video, I don't know how he's ever going to get another job. I mean, every time he goes in for a job, the guy's going to be laughing. So, with the introduction of new technologies, we have to understand how to deal with this new rapid spread of information. And almost every week we see some new issue. So last week we saw Facebook spies on phone text messages, a little bit disturbing. One of my favorite cases is Robbins versus Lower Merion School District.